So here we go. And let's share the screen. All right. I had not finished talking about the classical thinking, and I think I should try to give you a bit of an impression, because the theory of prices was crucial. In some sense, economists for a long time inquire only about prices. And the funny thing is that, as I repeated many times, but I repeat it once more, all this research about prices, all those writings about value and prices, was because at the end, they were concerned with distribution. You see, and again, remember what I've been telling repeatedly. A lot of economic analysis is historically biased, which does not mean that everything that is being said is wrong or does not reflect the general property of human behavior, but it means that the focus, the examples, and often the concepts you use are heavily influenced by what you observe. There's a big difference between studying physics, or in particular mechanics, and economics or the social sciences. Apparently, maybe one day we'll discover we're wrong, but apparently the laws of nature, those in the sense of atoms and gravitation and mass and so on, have not changed for millions of years. Humans' behavior have. Maybe the deep laws that rule humans deeply inside have not changed. But certainly the way we behave, the things we trade, we consume, the technology we use has changed. And that has affected our view of economic laws enormously. Today, once I'm done with this, we'll start talking about money. And money is a perfect example. The very same notion of money has changed over time, over history in different countries, because the actual objects called money have changed. And the way it's being used and generated more than produced and traded has changed. And so people have tried to adapt. And so from this very long history of money with different theories, one, in order to do monetary theory, you need to kind of work on, as you will see, between today and next Tuesday, on two levels. There are some general properties of money that were true in the Roman time or the Babylonian and so on, and are true today and apply to Bitcoin as much as they apply to the sesterce or sesterzo. And there are other than not. So much. They're so local that I believe we will not have time to talk about this, but I believe that monetary policy today follows laws and rules that are very different from the monetary policy of 50 years ago, 40 years ago, even probably 30. Okay? And that's what makes economics a bit of an ambiguous field, right? Sometimes you can extract rules, laws, causalities that are general, that are true over time and across space, but oftentimes that's not possible. Oftentimes you just accept that the thing you figured out was true in that country in that period, and may not be true in another country in another period. And the balance between the two is quite crucial. And so the classicals had some general ideas. For example, as we have discovered, Ricardo came up with this idea of marginal, inframarginal firms, rents, competitive rents, zero rents, in trying to explain the income of landowner as a residual. So he had in mind a very specific problem of his time. But then you think, well, as an analytical tool, it's good for everything, right? In pretty much every activity, some people or firms or entities are better than others at doing that thing. And so if there is some kind of market that treats them equally, those that are better than the average or better than the marginal guy will earn more rents, more rewards, more happiness, more whatever. Think about even at school. Even at school, when there is a passing level, many courses, the professor set a passing level. If you do above that, you get pass. If not, you stay below. Well, there are rents there too. People that are faster and quicker at learning earn a rent. Which rent? Well, takes less time, more time for other things. Some people have to study 50 hours, others have to study 40, others 30, and some people can do with 10 hours. Well, those that can do with 10 hours have 40 hours of leisure to dedicate to other things. That's a rent. So that's an example of an analytical concept that is good also outside the historical cases in which it was developed, other not. So, for example, one thing that was clearly true of classical thinkers is that societies do obey to some laws. So they insist on the fact that there are ways of discovering through observation and analysis the rules that govern, in some sense, societies. Okay, doesn't matter that those that they have found may or may not be correct. But that's among the first people that recognized this, because before there was this view that the rules that society obey are the rules that they have to obey. Remember, we repeat it often, right? There was this view that you have to be normative. You have to tell people this is the just thing to do. But in that period that eventually led to the classical economists, it started out actually in France, this way of thinking. People started to recognize that humans have a degree of autonomy. They are what they are. Okay, the humans are not reducible to this simple thing of tabula rasa. If you educate them well, if they're good Christians, they behave well. If you don't educate them right, then they behave wrong. Well, they have instinct, preferences, way of interacting, and so on. And these are independent from culture and religion. And you're not born as a tabula rasa here refers to an old idea that has been around for a long time and still is. Rousseau has a bit of it. So Rousseau is a good example during that period of a person that had a view of the humans which was quite different from that of the classical economists. In Rousseau, right, you're born and you're essentially like Pongo, putty. You can be made into anything. It all depends on the environment. You can be educated and become the Muslim, a Christian, an assassin, anything. Just depends on the environment. Your brain is empty, basically. It's just a lot of neurons that has to be shaped up. Now we know that this is absolutely not true, starting with Chomsky and linguistics and so on. We've learned a lot more about preset modules in our brain and the fact that to a certain extent, we can talk about human nature as something not very precise, and it's unclear if we ever will be able to make it precise, but we do understand that there are aspects of human nature that you cannot change, certainly not with this idea of education and molding individuals, right? And that's the first period in which this view comes up. And you understand, in the moment in which you realize that there is something preset about you, that evolution and whatever adaptability have preset our brain, our attitude, the relation between our sentiments and our thinking in a way as opposed to another. Okay? then it's a natural step to say, then there must be laws. I don't know if you noticed the thing. Tabula rasa implies there are no laws, or everything can be a law. Law in the sense of rule, of regularity, patterns of behavior. Right? In order for there being a law that I study objectively, that it's independent of me, that I look at it and I cannot affect it, and I cannot create, it must be the case the human brain are not tabula rasa. Because if they are tabula rasa, then anything can go. And it will all depend on what they've been taught at school, or in the family, or in the church, or in the synagogue, or in the mosque. It doesn't matter, right? Whereas if I accept that, for example, most human, the law you can give it a statistical representation. Most humans have a certain degree of empathy for other humans. Most humans prefer trade or not. Most humans have certain notion of fair trade or no fair trade. Most humans tend to pursue personal happiness, which, you say, well, obvious. Why is that obvious? Not obvious at all. Why should we be pursuing personal happiness per se? If you are a tabula rasa, not necessarily. You may be educated to pursue personal unhappiness. So everybody can become masochist and suffer for real. So not, masochists don't suffer for real. They actually enjoy it, theoretically, at least. You understand what I'm saying? So only if I assume that humans have some preset rules that their brain follow, then I can start talking about social laws. And the classics are the first social scientists that I know, making that very explicit, very explicit. Then there is the other aspect, which is very clear among the classical, which is why Marx is fully a classical economist. And it's a bit of a residual of the medieval, if you want to call it, or pre-1600 world. That is, the humans are divided in classes. If you go all the way back to Plato's or the writers of the antiquity, you will see that they theorize that humans are divided in castes more than classes. And then they are so because that's the right way to be. It's unavoidable. You're born a farmer because you're born a farmer. You just, we are the same human race, but you're a different type from me. It's like horses. It's a pony and different. So a slave is a slave, and a warrior is a warrior, and you belong. You're stuck into these classes, and there is no mobility in and out. And this, as we know, it's quite true in the strict medieval period, at least in those societies, in those portions of Europe that are strictly medieval. Notice that this word Middle Age is very ambiguous. Very ambiguous. City of Venice, where we are, and its moment of splendor mostly during the Middle Age. If we take the usual classification that the Middle Ages are over in 1492, also the glory of Venice was over by 1492 or was starting to decline. 16th century was a lot of fun, but it also was a period of declining power and not rising power. So the word Middle Age, medieval is very ambiguous. Okay, so Venice was certainly a city where people were not necessarily structured into social group to which they had to belong forever. But, for example, the Serrata del Gran Consiglio was a classical example of closing down a social group. It says, whoever is in, the others are out. The aristocracy of Venice is, boom, defined. You cannot get into it. The families that are out for good. If you went, in the border between France and Germany, current France and current Germany, where the social structure, medieval structure were more robust and overwhelming, I would say, then that social structure was even better defined. The noble was the noble. The servant was the servant. There was no communication between the two. You cannot move. This view of the world was there. And so it's not surprising that in 1700, when these people started thinking about the social groups interacting and notice that the world is changing, the people are moving more and more. They've been moving more and more since a couple of hundred years from one social group to another. They've been changing professions, okay? But they say, there are three groups: the capitalist, the landowner, the workers. And they are defined by the income they receive, the type of income they receive. People still today look at that as a reasonable way of approaching social groups. I find it totally wrong, very frankly, but this is not the topic for the class. It's very misleading. It's very misleading, in particular, if you treat these social groups as predefined. Income sources are typically a mixture. Think about, and I leave it there, but think seriously about the way in which Steve Jobs and Michael Jordan have made a lot of money. What was their source of income? Okay? In any case, in the classical, there are three classes: capitalists, workers, landowners. So there was an idea they had that I don't think has done well over time, but they had. Then they had another idea that, again, I'm on the first to think about this, that we do lots of things intentionally. Humans are, it's something that we call awareness, conscience. We don't understand how it works. Explaining consciousness is still a huge open problem. Some of my preferred philosophers think, in fact, that we will never explain consciousness. We'll never get a grip on it, maybe. But the point is that it's the classical thinkers that they say, okay, we act intentionally and we act purposefully. We are after something when we do something. We might be getting it wrong, maybe trying to increase the length of my legs by torturing myself and pulling, but at least I have a purpose. The interesting thing they say is that studying isolated individual is a good starting point to understand intention. But if you want to understand social outcomes, you got to look at the interaction among people. Because the interaction among people produce outcomes that are both unexpected and oftentimes different, even opposite from what people meant to do. Today, is everybody talking about complexity theory? You must have heard about, especially after Giorgio Parisi got the Nobel Prize, well deserved. And there is no doubt that the development of some complex system among theoretical physicists has been remarkable. But very honestly, the idea of emergent behavior, complex system, interacting particle, aggregate outcomes being following certain rules and being different, independent from individual intentions on, is as old as economics. I'm willing to claim, and it's a big claim and even get recorded, that the theory of system, of social system and complex system, was invented, at least in the form of general proposition or a mathematical proposition, by the classical economist or sociologist. I mean, to call them economists, I don't know, social scientists of the 18th century. I forgot now the name of the French fellow that wrote the fable of the bees, because it has a name standing, Mandeville. It's a little short story, it's a metaphor. By this guy Bernard, I forgot, Bernard de Mandeville. Yeah, and it has this story which wants to say, look, you can obtain social cooperation and produce social organization without a king or a ruler or a pope that tells you what to do. If you have a set of rules that people have to follow, and then you let them behave purposefully, then you get good social outcomes by self-organization. It's clearly a concept that was there. Self-organized system. 200 and plus years later, initial theorists of complexity in the natural science, like my old friend Per Bach, that is now dead, unfortunately, started talking about self-organized criticality. It was the same thing. Obviously, in the Per Bach version, even if later we figured out it didn't work really, it had a much more well-specified mathematical structure. In Bernard de Mandeville, it was just a story about the bees and how they communicate, how they interact, and how they end up serving a social purpose, even if individually they're not aware of it, okay? And he was obviously made the analogy with humans trading, producing, and interacting, and so on. But this is another, I would say, analytical concept that goes beyond the fact that the classical got influenced by what they were seeing. And what were they seeing? They were seeing the transition over the more or less 200 years or so before them and in the societies where they live, from a society that seemed to be ordained from the, organized from the top, completely pyramidal, with a king or a pope or whatever that gave orders and established what you have to do and where you belong and what's your role, what are the actions, to a society where those constraints were breaking up, where various forms of authority were falling, where degree of independence of actions here and there in the cities, the traders, the merchants, the first entrepreneurs and so on. Labor was becoming freer and freer, moving around. The guilds restricted trade in the city less than in the past. And therefore, people were kind of self-organizing because pure self-organization is kind of an oxymoron, doesn't exist, right? Any system has some boundary rules that allow organization, otherwise you just get pure entropy. But certainly they saw something historically, and this something is relevant even today. Then there were more specific things. Human labor is the source of all values. We have gone over it abundantly, but why was this idea so central to the classical thinkers? Not because before nobody thought the human labor was the source of values, or at least in the societies that had preceded them and in the culture at which they'd been educated, value was described as something pre-established. Even if in the instances of market that were there also during the Middle Age, at the end, the laws of demand and supply and value and cost were at work. If you took the point of view of the thinking about society in the 13th, 14th, 15th century, this centrality of human labor, of entrepreneurial activity was not there. So they thought, wow, this is extraordinarily new. And I have to stress this because this is where the wealth of the people are coming from. That's where the wealth of the nation come from. That's the point of, in fact, Smith, that has a great intuition. Not because he's the first, other probably have had similar intuition, but he makes it very clear. The wealth of the nation come from labor and entrepreneurship, and from the fact that if we allow for an increasing division of labor, this goes hand in hand with the size of the market, and to the extent that we allow broader commerce, more trade, then we can get deeper division of labor. This makes us more productive and therefore wealthier. That's basically what the guy has in mind. And what is he observing? He's observing that if you live in a world of subsistence of actually, or autarkic world in which a community or even a clan has to provide for most of its needs by direct production, and very little is left to exchange with other communities, then you can live decently, but certainly you don't get great wealth for everybody. And as you reduce that form of autarky, as you expand trade and you allow for division of labor, people become better at doing the things. They kind of specialize. By the way, the idea of comparative advantages is also in Smith. It's not stated. That's why everything in economics is in Smith, because the guy wrote so much that, you know, by looking carefully, you find pretty much every later idea. So it's explained much better in Ricardo, but the idea of comparative advantages is, in my opinion, he has it in a number of passages. But he has this great intuition, which again is limited, because to say that the division of labor is the engine of growth, which is what he was saying, but it's limited by the extent of the market, is very ambiguous, right? Because it's like a chicken and egg problem. So what comes first, right? If I say that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market, I'm suggesting that how big the market is comes first. And then you tell me the market is that large, then I do the division of labor. As we noticed, that's not necessarily the case. The two things interact. Sometimes division of labor creates new markets because it allows technological change, for example, in transportation communication, that integrate markets that before were separate. But obviously, again, why is he coming up with that? Because at the time, the fight for trading was crucial on the political side. Now, we're talking about globalization now, but there was a globalization process taking place in those centuries at a much smaller scale, even within what we call now nations, you know? Think about Italy from that point of view, right? In Italy, you would have dazi and dogane at every corner because the political entities were divided. Even within a common political entity like the Republic of Venice, you would have to pay duties in moving from one city to another. So obviously enlarging, allowing traders and merchants from one city to go trade, buy and sell in another was not obvious. So there was a political component that determined the size of the market. And Smith was on the side of those that were pushing for more free trade between one city, one area of the country. And that's why, you know, from his point of view, he says, well, look, the division of labor is giving us wealth, but if you don't allow for the size of the market to grow, the division of labor will not grow. That's basically his argument. And then the theoretical part, again, and this is very crucial. This is where actually I started with price equal cost as the basic of the classical theory. There is not much competition actually going on in the period of rights. There is limited competition. Free entry is quite limited. But they do observe that competition, market competition, is quite useful and tend to make prices uniform, all kinds of prices, including the price of factors of production, okay? So they have this view. So their view, remember, is that there is this natural stable price around which we oscillate. But the process of competition tends to make those oscillations smaller. It tends to make, you know, the perturbation goes away, so to speak. The factor that moves the price away from the normal price eventually goes away because competition, entry or exit, pushes the price either up or down. So that's the one analytical element they start from. The other analytical element they start from, which is historically determine, it's a bias, is Malthus in some sense. Remember what I told you about Malthus, right? So Malthus is fascinating to read, by the way. Malthus is not only Malthusian. Malthus is really sharp. It's, by the way, on Amazon, you can find all the classicals for free. So if you have a Kindle, just go on Amazon Kindle. You'll find all the classical writings for 90 cents, sometimes 45 cents. I think you can afford that, okay? I think you can afford 90 cents. And they're in very good condition. So you can download the classical for free. And Malthus, actually, which is less verbose than Smith, is worth reading. His way of thinking is very nice. Okay, but anyhow, they have the Malthus observation. Eventually, we go back to this situation of kind of minimum wage, no? Survival, because we reproduce, blah, blah, blah. And that kind of fit with what they had seen, right? It's 1730, 1750. They see there are lots of things changing, but when they look back, they think, they also have a limited point of view. Obviously, they say, well, here I am, I'm a professor at the University of Glasgow. I live well, sure. But how much better than a professor at the University of Padua or Bologna or Paris or Oxford in 1200 do I live? Not much. Matter of fact, not much. Better, but not much better. So, you look back half a millennium, and your social group is not doing a lot better than 500 years ago. And you look at the farmers, they're not doing a lot better than 500. They're doing better. They're freer, for example. Some machines have been introduced, blah, blah, blah. And so these guys eventually say, these two things go very well together. Normal price determined by the cost of production that I get on average, stationary state of the economy. Perfect. I have a model, right? You see, the point of the model sometimes is that you have to accept to throw away details. Well, the details they throw away is growth and technological change. That's why I invite you to read them, and anybody that is curious. Reading the classical is fascinating because of this. They have some great intuition that are still true, and they screw up royally on a number of things. But the way they screw up royally, it's almost justifiable. From the point of view of somebody writing 1780, growth and continuous change was an extraordinary event. So you would not focus your analytical attention on that. You would focus your analytical attention on how prices get determined, what the components of prices are, how factor of production get rewarded, wage, profits, and rents, right? And that's what they do. They build a system that it's known technically as a steady state or system in which eventually you produce the same quantity of every kind of commodity. There are the same commodities, the same number of people that reproduce, and there is a normal cost of production. And because there is competition and free entry, prices equal cost, where cost includes opportunity cost. And it's the stationary state model of economics, which has influenced economists until the other day. When we'll talk about development and growth toward the end of the course, you will see that it took until Schumpeter to say, hey, guys, maybe we should think in a different way. And even after that, it's not obvious that even today we think in a different way. In fact, Italy, and not only Italy, is full of people that keep talking that we should go back to the classics and talk about distribution of income as a stationary state and so on and so forth. And they seem to be missing the whole point. Okay. All right. So that's what I wanted to tell you about classical thinking, because I think it puts both what we said about prices all together, but it also allows us later on to talk about growth and production and inequality with a clear mind. So the classical model, in some sense, is still the dominant model for macroeconomics. Think about it. Try to do this during these days. Try to think at a word, because it's a model, right? So in a model, you have to be faithful to the mathematics. In a world where people do always the same things, which the shocks are very small, they're temporary. There's nothing drifting you in direction or another. In that world, it's natural to think that prices will become very stable and will correspond to the cost of production. Right? It's not a strange conclusion. Okay? All right. Enough. Money. Oh, this was a slide I forgot. But this already said. There was this comment about the Nobel Prize, but given that I already spent an hour and a half with some friends discussing this exactly Monday night or Tuesday, I forgot when we did it. If you're curious, you go and listen to that discussion. All right, so money. Now, when you say money, people think wealth. Money, money, give me money. Especially in Italy these days. Oh, there is not enough money around. That's why we're poor. They're hiding the money away from us. I want the money. Well, money is a way in which you can preserve wealth, for sure. One of the ways in which you can preserve wealth, which means first you create it, and then you preserve it. So you don't create wealth by printing money or by producing money or by creating money. Okay? But you create wealth, and when you find a way of transforming it into money, and that's one way of preserving the purchasing power of that wealth have, if two conditions are realized that you know perfectly what they are. If money doesn't get devalued, that is, if there is no a lot of inflation, and if that type of money you picked is still accepted tomorrow. In fact, as we learn, it's an old classification, but let's try to remember it again. And pretty much anybody that thought about money over the history of humanity, I would say, has realized this. Money is a way of preserving wealth. Money is a way of facilitating exchange. Money is a very practical numeraire. It's not the only possible numeraire. We can measure the value of everything in oranges, or in nails, or in whatever you want, or in sandwiches. But to the extent that there is something around that looks like a money that is accepted, it's much more useful to measure prices and values in units of money. So money becomes like the meter, the liter, and so on. That's trivial, but let's keep it in mind. But there are various types of money. And as you notice there, I distinguish between three types and not two. People often talk about metallic money and fiat money. Fiat money, as you will see, is essentially, or was essentially until the other day, paper money. But let's try to explain the three names. So fiat money is not Fabbrica Italiana Automobili Torino, but it's a Latin word by fiat, right? That you create something out of nothing. Strictly not true, but it refers to the fact that starting at a certain point in time, governments started to print the currency, to produce currency by printing symbols on a piece of paper. one expensive piece of paper, particular piece of paper, because they wanted to avoid counterfeiting, but a piece of paper. And that because they could put a lot of zero in that printing, no matter how expensive the paper was and how fancy the printing was and how beautiful the decoration were, the value, the market value of that piece of paper, once it was printed, was orders of magnitude the market value of that same piece of paper before having anything printed on it. Okay? So fiat, because you create value out of nothing. That's the idea. It's also not true, but it's also the idea. Okay? So that's what we mean with fiat money. As you will see, as we will see, maybe late today or Tuesday, in some sense, fiat money was invented not by the governments, the printer, blah, 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 but the Venetian bankers or the Florentine bankers a few hundred years before, when they start writing bank checks or the other paper forms of credit or credit accreditation that they used in trading across Europe. But we'll get to that later. For now, let's stick to that. So that's fiat money. On the opposite side, there is metallic money, which means basically coins. This seems to be, everybody thinks that that's the obvious way of money. Money is that thing, even in the comics, right? Well, Paperon de Paperoni, otherwise known as Scrooge, in his deposit, he has both coins and bills, so paper and metal. But the spontaneous way of thinking is a coin made of gold or silver. And the idea there was that that coin had that value because it contained that value. It wasn't fiat. So the idea was, first of all, that coin of gold has that value intrinsically, like a sandwich or a pair of shoes. But contrary to the sandwich, you cannot eat it. It doesn't rotten. Contrary to the shoes, it doesn't get worn out. And so it's very stable. So we use that to produce money. And then silver and bronze or whatever you want. Okay? Or stones or other things. Okay? So that was the original view that that's money. And why that thing has value seemed to everybody very obvious. It has value because it contains the value. The paper money the fiat money is a mystery. It doesn't contain the value. But the metallic money is obvious. Commodity money was instead a strange thing that has appeared and disappeared, which is essentially the fact that at certain instances, some stuff that was somewhat tradable and movable and durable played the role of money. There are the notorious examples: cigarettes in prison and concentration camps, jade in certain areas of Asia and China back in the past, ivory, and so on. On and off. Why is it there? It's there to show that there depends how you look at it. A lot of things can be money. So if money is just the intermediate element for a transaction, for a triangulation, him and I cannot trade directly, but we can trade indirectly through him, right? Because he wants the stuff he has, and I want the stuff he has, so then we can do the trading. Then money can be that middle agent between him and him one and him two, and between him two and me, okay? And it doesn't, when it happens in small communities, in small groups where people can identify each other, it goes through, it runs spontaneously. You see the difference? Both fiat money and metallic money historically were always issued by somebody. And that somebody always had a sword in his hand. Commodity money is kind of spontaneous money. But every single example we have, I know no other example, are example of a small community in particular situation, isolated, and in which trade is only partially anonymous. That is, the person I trade, I actually know who she is. And therefore, this object that goes around as a means of payment does not need to be certified by an authority because we trust each other. In other words, if we use cigarettes, I trust that you haven't, and you've given me a pack of cigarettes, Kent, for example. That was the case in Romania, I remember, back when there was Ceausescu. You know, people did not bother to check if inside the pack there were really cans or if they had emptied the pack and then sealed it back. Okay? And this is because we kind of know each other. So there is a literature on this. I will not go much into this, but I want to talk about this a bit. Okay? Of this idea that anything can become money as long as people trading among themselves accept that object as money and do so spontaneously. And I want to cut, it's a subtle difference, but it's very important between fiat, which I accept because the emperor stamps it, and what I have called commodity money. If you want to call it symbolic money, call it as you want. I call it, in the profession, it's called coconuts, by the way, but we'll explain later why. Okay? In which an object becomes money and goes around as a medium of exchange without any external authority imposing it. We just all agree spontaneously. You see, it's a case of self-organization, right? Our mutual interaction lead us to share this means of payment. Okay. Now, said that, let's define the terminology, basically. Now, every student of economics, I'm sure it happened to you too, if you took a course in monetary theory, they started from the barter economy. Again, this is Adam Smith's world, because he has a famous passage in The Wealth of the Nation in which he talks about that primitive state of society, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't put a warning. He says, warning, I feel like Jesus Christ today, so I'm talking about parables. I'm not really talking about the true state of society. I'm just inventing it because I want to tell you a story. And it's true that whenever money is introduced in a standard course in economics, people tend to say, oh, you know, if there were no money, when there was no money, people would barter. And what is that the student does, or the weak mind, sometime of, say, certain economists do? They start thinking at their own world. It doesn't have to be Venice 2021. It could even be Padova 1980. And they think, oh, this world without money would be a terrible mess. Imagine, you know, going around, bartering everything. You know, you want my teaching? No, I don't want your teaching. Yes, I want your teaching, but you don't want my shoes. No, but let me go get something that you actually like in exchange of my shoes. I'll get other shoes, those you like. Then I'll bring you the shoes you teach for me. Oh, Christ. Right? So we start thinking of this incredibly insane world in which people go even at a town market, and I go with the eggs and the chicken, and he comes with the pork, and you come with the vegetables, and he's got just killed the cow. Instead, he's made some bread, and he's full of salami, and we start going around like crazy to do shopping. Right? And then money comes, miraculously, everything becomes simpler. Well, lots of people, anthropologists and critics, that's bullshit. That never happened, and they're right. That never happened. There was never, you know, the big market, even in 1200 or before, or the Roman time, in which people went to the market from the countryside or from their home, bringing each one of them a product and then trading 65 million times, you know, in order to turn my cow into a little bit of pork, a little bit of vegetable, a little bit of eggs, a little bit of chicken, a little bit of bread. No, a little bit of oil. No, it never happened. There was barter. Archaeological evidence and historical evidence shows us, but it was extremely limited and tended to be symbolic. Because if we go back in time, long enough that we have no evidence of anything that we can associate to money, we find things like commodity money. But what is that we find? We find economic structures that are, one, very simple, in which the division of labor is extremely limited, in which the essential social structure are extended families or clans. And the extended families or clans are certainly pseudo-economies, a pseudo-market inside themselves, but they're not regulated by continuous trading. They're regulated by an authority, the paterfamilias, the boss, the king, you know, whatever, that basically takes care of allocating duties and allocating goods. There is a beautiful book, if you're curious, by Findlay on the World of Ulysses. Findlay, I forgot his first name, I think it was Robert, and I'm afraid if somebody has Google in front, Findlay, Findlay. He was a historian, wonderful historian at Berkeley, and a student of Greek societies and economies. Wrote a bunch of technical stuff. He has a little beautiful book in which he takes essentially Odyssey and he extracts from what's in the Odyssey of Homer in English, indications, suggestions about the way in which the economy of Ithaca was organized and what it was, the true Ithaca, with a, you know, trying to estimate how many people was there, what this guy Ulysses did, what this queen and blah, 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 all right? And then obviously he uses also archaeological evidence and other things. He puts it all together. It's a little book. It's maybe 100 short pages. I bet you found it. Did you find it?
Maybe wrong.
Let me find it. Eh? What do you say? Maybe?
Wrong.
No, let me. Buoni. At this point. No. Am I remembering his last name wrong? Yeah, this is the guy. Yeah, Ronald Finlay. Okay, here he is. Found it. Oh, I can't write on the. No. No, I'm making him. Oh, sorry. I'm becoming an old man because I'm confusing authors. This is another person, the one at Columbia. This is Ron Finlay, the friend of this. Well, this is actually an interesting book to read, this one, but it's not the one I had in mind. Well, the argument is more studied than I thought, but this is not. good rule, don't start teaching in class something you have not prepared. I have no intention to. See, what a D. See, becoming old. Let me show it to those that are, sorry for those that are online, I took away the thing. I'll show you what's going on. It's Moses Finlay. Damn it, Boldrin. Many book. Here it is, the word of Odyssey. Oh, hallelujah. It's even translated in Italian. All right. 13 euros in case you, all right. So it's a beautiful book because I remember reading it many years ago and then my brain overlapped the economist at Columbia with economic historian or the historian at Berkeley because I was sure Finlay was at Berkeley. So it didn't make any sense that I found a guy at Columbia. And so if you, for example, start from there, you realize that the anthropologists criticizing economists that say, oh, money came spontaneously as a solution to the dramatic problem that barter induces because you need the famous double coincidence of wants. You probably heard this expression. They're right. Because in societies that were technologically primitive, essentially agricultural self-sustained, relatively small communities where few hundreds or few thousands defined it, economic activity was fairly centralized. There was little trade with external entities, and that little trade took place through symbolic means among the leaders of the community, through trips and other religious meetings or ritual meetings. So there was nothing that looked like the money we have in mind. There was no problem of barter. And what there was, and again, this is makes sense, debt. Where debt meant that some family or some group or some, rarely an individual, the notion of an isolated individual was not there, right? Would borrow a cow, literally, or food or something from another for a period of time, and that had to be paid back. And it's not unreasonable to think that, in fact, currency, in the sense of units in which debt and different object can be valued, that is money, might have come around as a solution to this problem, the problem of debt. In Hammurabi Code, it's there, quite clear. In Hammurabi Code, you see that there is some form of money circulating in that community, and that the king decides how much it is worth because he issues it. And he says, if you want to regulate your debt, this is as much and this is as much. So the idea that money comes out after debt and in some sense as a way of regulating debt transaction over time, because maybe you gave me a cow, but I don't have a cow to give you. I have a lot of pigs. And so how many pigs for a cow? Well, we'll go through the money. If the money is worth, if the cow is worth 100 units of money and each pig is worth 10, then it's 10 pigs I'm gonna have to give you, okay? Or grain or so on. And this makes you understand that the myth of barter is not a good way of introducing people to the history of money. Even if it is a good way to understand, then in a society of any degree of complexity, it doesn't have to be like ours, it could easily be the Roman one, which was a lot less complex technologically than ours, any minimum amount of trade among individuals would be impossible if we did not have something that played the role of money. You see? So there is a functional explanation of it, which is perfectly fine. Money is extremely useful because it solves the problem of the double coincidence of wants, even if historically it doesn't have to be the reason why, or it doesn't have to be the proper description of how money came around, because money came around in another way. Nothing strange with that. So yeah, I think we should stop teaching economics starting from, say, pretend there is a barter economy and then you solve everything by introducing a coin. We should say, money came around in another form, but it's certainly very useful to solve. And this also allows you to understand that commerce and trade in the way we have it now, or that we are used to thinking a century ago, 2 centuries, 3 centuries, 4 centuries, even 6th century in a city like this, is a very new phenomenon. The variety of goods and the amount of trade that we have observed in the post-communal period, in the post-medieval period, is unusually high by every standard, including those of the Roman Empire and including those of the Chinese Empire. The amount of trade going through the Mediterranean in Augustus, or you choose, Tiberius, you pick your preferred emperor, or even before that, right? Was substantial, but it was a lot less, and it was in a very few commodities, respect to the amount of trade that went on in the Adriatic, say, in 1200. And there is nothing surprising if you want to think about it, because the amount of commerce interact with the evolution of means of payment, but in terms, it's technological change that caused the evolution of trade of commerce and of money. The trade that was possible to Venice and Genoa and the other cities of the Mediterranean in the 1200, it was substantially more than the trade that was possible during the Roman Empire, even if the bulk quantity was less. Because the variety of things traded was much bigger. The number of independent entrepreneurs and traders participating was bigger. And the number of cities involved was bigger. So it was a more complex trade system. And it's not surprising that it took place only because some kind of monies became available, and vice versa, that for that commerce to grow, people had to find a way of having monies that were accepted in very different cities across the Mediterranean. And the three things are attached, right? It's impossible to say what was born first, right? The coin, the galleys traveling through, the production of goods and the commerce of spices coming from the Indies. There is an evolutionary process there taking place that defines the role of money. So that's the proper way to look at the evolution of money historically, which does not imply that that's the proper way of looking at what money does now. Okay, it would be very silly to start thinking about, what's the role of the euros, right? By having in mind the Venetian Ducato in 1400 and starting to take the analogy. No? There is an evolution in human activity. What you can see is what's common. Once certain metal coins, certain gold coin and silver coin and what Cipolla called the small change. That's another little book you can read. The Big Problem of Small Change by Carlo Cipolla. It's very interesting. I'll tell you in a second why it's very interesting. It has to do with what we're doing. Those kind of currencies were instrument of trade that had to be accepted in various places. And here there was a big problem. If one has a purely metallic view of money, one would say, oh, all you have to do is to take one of those currencies and weigh, check how much gold is in there. But if that was the case, why people did not trade with just gold? Right? See the question? No? So it's 1200. Commerce is growing. The Middle Age is fading away. The Mediterranean, there are all these cities in Italy started trading. There are, the Arabs here and there. The Muslims are willing to trade. There is certain kind of activities. The roads that go north toward the Rhine Valley and all the way to the Netherlands are safer and safer, so we can start going there, trade once or twice a year, big caravans, but we can take the risk, right? That we're not going to be robbed. There are not going to be dukes and counts and morons along the way taxing us to death, so to make the trip impossible, okay? So we're starting to trade. And these are very different, independent states. Venice is certainly a state, so is Genoa, so certainly is the Caliph in Istanbul and in Granada and so on, right? So they're different political power. But all these merchants are mixing. They're mixing a lot, a lot more than we thought, Did you ever wonder how many common words Venetian and Spanish have? You think it's by chance that we call a calle, and they call it a calle? Right? A Rio, and so on and so forth. You think it's by chance that the phonetic of properly spoken Venetian makes your life a lot easier in Madrid than otherwise, than standard Italian? No, it's not by chance. These people were mixing. Good. And they needed money to trade because now barter would certainly not work. If money had been around for a while, they all were used to money. The idea of money was not new at all. And in fact, they had different type of money, all issued by their own state power. Some more accepted than others. And then there was one, I don't remember what's the name, which was the old money issued by the Byzantine emperor in what was at the time Constantinople. Okay? Constantinople was still part of that leftover Eastern Roman Empire, right? It was Christian. The Muslims were near there in the southern part of Middle East, but not there yet. And that was the oldest, the most established military and cultural power of the Mediterranean. That had been there for a long time. Since what? I forgot when Constantino went there, but it must have been around 400 or something, even earlier, probably 300 and something. Forgot the dates. Yeah, earlier than 400, certainly 300 and something. That's why it's called Constantinople, because Constantino moved the capital there, established the second capital. So it was the power, the military and political power that had been there essentially forever, for 1,000 years. 1,000 years is a long time. And what is that we learn? We learn two things. These people were trading various coins from various cities or states. They were all metallic coins, gold and silver. Then there was a small change in copper and so on, but that's another story. The big trade was made with the big coins. And second, the one coin that was accepted pretty much everywhere, and there was the unit of measure and value to which everybody referred, was the one that had been issued by the people in Byzantium, Constantinople. Why do I observe that? I observe that, and I stress this, because if the metallic view was correct, these two things should not have happened. If the metallic view is correct, this guy should have just traded going around with little bags with some gold and silver in it, in the form maybe yes of coin, but without any stamp. There was no reason to have a stamp. All you needed were units of gold. If it is the metallic content of it that determines its value, why do I need the stamp? And why do I need the stamp and I accept the stamp only of some states and not of other? And why is there one state that is better than everybody else? The dollar. You see, it was the dollar of the Mediterranean. Why the dollar? Dollar is fiat, but there was the dollar there too. If it was metallic, why? Please.
Change metallic. So it wasn't 100% gold. So if I put my stamp on it, I knew that I was making good coins in gold. But for example, film was Venice and it was making gold coins with silver and gold.
So you're saying the reason the stamp was because it was a certification that it truly was 100% gold.
Why give me gold? Because it was the most reliable power, so it was more reliable.
Yeah, but why the power? So these are slightly different. They're both consistent. No doubt, the fact that there was a stamp certified that it had a certain content of gold. Well, but that brings around not one but three observations. One, apparently then there is a reputational matter which is independent from the metal content. The reason that thing was valuable was because I trusted the Venetian mint, the Florentine mint, and so on. Second, these guys were trading all kinds of objects. And they were trading all kinds of objects repeatedly by, how can I say, verifying the quality. You know, you sell me spices. How do I know the spices are good? You sell me carpets, you sell me meat, you sell me stuff. So to the extent that they had the ability of testing or figuring out or at least betting, or it was because it was a repeated trade, you better don't cheat on me today because 6 months from now when I come back, I'm not going to trade with you anymore. All right. Why couldn't they do it for gold? Because among other things, they were also trading gold and silver. I mean, per se, the material to make jewels, for example, and stones. So true, no, I agree that, and you read the documents of the time, and it's clear that one of the motivation is that. And the third observation, finally, is why is it that what we observe is that while these monies were circulating across the Mediterranean among the big traders, inside the single political entities, so inside the Republic, inside the Republic of Genoa, and so on, that was not the case. Inside, essentially only the coins, in fact, the small coins, issued by the state in question was circulating, and not the foreign, let's call it foreign coin. Okay. Your observation is a bit, incomplete, because then now the question is, which is what I'm trying to lead to, the fact that it's a political power, what does it have to do with money? Money is money, right? If the metalist view is correct, the fact that this piece of gold was put there by a big political power or by a weak political power makes no difference. People these days spend millions to try to create small submarines to go under and find Spanish, typically, and Portuguese ships from a bit later than that period, from the 17th century, that were sunk and contain gold and typically coins, money in gold of the time. And those things are very valuable. That's why they're trying to extract, but they're not valuable because they're produced by a political power. That political power is long gone, it doesn't exist at all. They're valuable, those, for two reasons. Their metal content, they're made of gold and silver, and then the archaeological value of having a doubloon of the 16th century as well. So the observation here suggests what? Suggests that what this says, history offers support to both views. What is metallism? Metallism, I just said, it's money as value because it contains the metal. And the market value of the metal is corresponds to the market value of the coin. Chartalism, why is that cartalism? It's supposed to be an H, sorry. Oh, there is an H here. That's an Italian thing. I thought I had corrected it. Okay, sorry. Chartalism is a different view. Plato was the first chartalist. Chartalism says money circulates within a state because it's issued by the royal power, by the military power, by the authority, by the state, and the state gives it value. Notice that this is a very incomplete theory. We will talk about Tuesday. But it says what gives value to the money is the imposition, the military imposition, that says this is the way in which debt can be repaid in my country. So it goes back to Hammurabi and says, at a certain point, people have debt, relation, they have borrowed, they have credit and debt in objects, because people care about the objects, the commodities, the cows, the grains, the clothes. But in order to solve the problem that I cannot give back the same cows you gave me because I ate it, okay? Then I need to issue something that is accepted as a means of payment, and the king issues it and says, this is the value of it. And you accept it. And to the extent everybody accepts it, notice, to the extent everybody accepts it, that becomes the money. Now, when I say to the extent everybody accepts it, one could say, oh, but then it's commodity money, the one I mentioned before, the coconut. Well, it depends. No, it seems to me, and honestly, this is a very open debate. I wish my friend Randy Bright was here because we've been debating this for I met Randy in 87, so 34 years, okay? Randy believes in coconuts. Him and Nobu Kiyotaki are the world theorists of coconuts. I don't believe coconuts is right. What is the idea? The idea is that I accept that as a means of payment because we all agree spontaneously, or I accept that because we all agree, and the reason we all agree is because we all believe that the king is going to kick our butt if we don't agree. See, it's two different things. We all stop on red lights. But do we all stop on red light because we all agree stopping on red lights independent from management? Or do we all stop on red light because we're afraid of getting a ticket? The first is a self-organized order. The second is a heterodirect order. That still relies on some degree of cooperation. Why? Because if we all stop on red lights, it works. If only a few of us don't stop, it still works. If the majority of us stop stopping, stop respecting the laws and don't stop on red lights anymore, the system collapses. And there is no policeman that can come after you because there are too many tickets to be given. Right? Which is this strange borderline between what we call laws and what we call social norms. Right? At the end, if a law that has to do with individual behavior that requires repeated compliance over time, every day by millions of people, does not become a social norm, it's no longer a law either. It just collapses. It remains on paper, but it's just violated systematically. I'm sure you can make a lot of examples of it, right? I'm sure you can make a lot of examples. For example, buying the ticket when you get on the bus in certain Italian cities, right? And so on. Let's not get into more serious example. All right, but that's the big debate among monetary theorists, and it's very funny. It's been there. This one really from Plato and Aristotle. Plato was a chartalist. Money has value because the prince, the king, issues it. He issues it and he says, you pay your due to me with that. This is the only currency that circulates in my kingdom, and that's it. Aristotle says, no, money has value because it contains metals. Metals are valuable, and people trade money at a face value, which is equal to its intrinsic value, where face value is what's stamped on it, intrinsic value is what it would have by trading as a pure metal. Now we know another suggestion that the metallist may be confused, that is that they may have caught a historical phenomenon that depends on the technology, but I have missed the deepest definition of money is the following: seigniorage. You know what seigniorage is. The origin of seigniorage has to do with the fact that when you brought a precious metal to the royal mint to have it coined, it contained a little bit less eventually, because there was a seigniorage, the debasement of currency, as it used to be called, right? And we know that over time, government, states, kings typically debase the currency in the sense of having currency, metal currency circulating at a face value that was increasingly higher than the metal content, than the intrinsic value. So seigniorage is a huge, how can I say, negative test, falsification, the metallist view. True, it was still metal. True, there was still gold and silver in it, but the intrinsic value and the face value were different. And the face value was the value which it circulated, and it circulated that value because there was a state power strong enough to impose that circulation, from which we conclude the so-called Gresham law, that apparently was very many people other law, and also St. Augustine law, that the bad money drives away the good money. A further element against metalism. Because you know what the Gresham law says, right? If I have two monies, two metal money, circulating at the same face value, or multiple of it, doesn't matter, right? But one of them has a higher intrinsic content than the other, the best money, the better money, the one with higher intrinsic content, will disappear from circulation. Everybody understand? No, they don't steal it. They just put it away, right? If this thing has a value of 5 and circulates at the value of 10, and this has a value of 7 and circulates at the value of 10 of metal content, I put this in the pocket and I give you this, because this one I can turn into metal and sell it at 7, right? But if this is true, then metalism doesn't work. Metalism is a temporary theory, so to speak. It's a temporary explanation based on the fact that given the technology of the time, minting metals, especially precious metal, was the most efficient way of creating something that people could bring around as token, as symbols of purchasing power, and that you could carry around, that was lasting, and on which the king could put the stamp and so on. So, but the intrinsic value was just chance. And in fact, it was so much chance that quite rapidly it went away. that the king quite rapidly said, wait a second, they're accepting this not because it contains gold to the full extent of the face value. They're accepting this because I said that it's worth so much, so many cows. So let me take a bit of gold and still say this is worth so many cows. It seems to me that this historical evidence is quite convincing, and it says one theory is a kind of a temporary historical theory, whereas if I look at the longer extension of time over which we have used monies and currencies, it seems to me that the symbolic power chartalism view is more, is capable of explaining more facts. Because at the end, that's the point, right? If you're able to explain all the facts I explain with my theory, but you also explain a few other, well, then you're better than me. We'll stop here, and I leave cryptocurrencies for Tuesday, so you can think about it. Because you see, cryptocurrencies are interesting. They're a chartalist phenomenon, but they're a commodity money phenomenon in the sense I use it. They're a coconut. Cryptocurrencies are a coconut, in the sense I said in class before, right? Are they a coconut or are they fiat money? My friends, the theorists of coconuts, don't think cryptocurrencies are coconuts, but I point out to them, are money, sorry. But I keep insisting with them that they're incoherent, because if commodity money is the essence of money, it's a self-organized equilibrium that doesn't require the state, then cryptocurrencies will have to become money. We'll talk about that Tuesday, so you can think about it. Thank you.